In this lesson, I'm going to be using slides provided by MoMA, which is the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The first artist that we're going to look at is Andy Warhol. And by the late 1950s and early 1960s, this is when the heyday of abstract expressionism is over. There was a cultural revolution led by activists, thinkers, and artists who wanted to rethink and overturn what was, in their eyes, a very stifling social order ruled by conformity. The Vietnam War had incited mass protests, the civil rights movement sought equality for African Americans, and the women's liberation movement had gained momentum. It was in this climate of turbulence, experimentation, and consumerism that a new generation of artists emerged in Britain and America in the mid to late 1950s. Pop artists began to look for inspiration in the world around them, representing and at times making art directly from everyday items, consumer goods, and mass media. Pop artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein were very aware of the past. They sought to connect fine art traditions with pop culture elements from television, advertisements, films, and cartoons. At the same time, their work challenged traditional boundaries between media, combining painted gestures with photography and printmaking, combining handmade and ready-made or mass-produced elements, and combining objects, images, and sometimes text to make new meanings. Pop artists adopted commercial methods like silk screening or produced multiples of works, downplaying the artist's hand and subverting the idea of originality, which is in marked contrast with the highly expressive, large-scale abstract works of the abstract expressionists, whose work had dominated post-war American art. Pop artists favored realism, everyday and even mundane imagery, and heavy doses of irony and wit. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have an image by Jackson Pollock, who was an abstract expressionist. Compare that to Andy Warhol's Campbell soup cans. There is a stark difference between ideas of the artist's physical creation versus a repetitive, patterned consumerism that Warhol shows in his work. Take a moment to look up the word appropriation. Well, I'll explain in a moment what it's about, but I'd like you to find out for yourself what it means in the context of pop art. So what is appropriation? Let's take a look at Marcel Duchamp's bicycle wheel. The concept of appropriation, which is borrowing images or objects to make art, began actually in the early 20th century with Dada artists like Marcel Duchamp. Bicycle wheel is Duchamp's first ready-made, a class of object that he invented to challenge assumptions about what constitutes a work of art. Here Duchamp chose two mass-produced parts, a bicycle wheel and a kitchen stool, and he put them together in an assemblage, creating a sort of non-functional machine. By simply selecting prefabricated items and calling them art, he subverted established notions of the artist's craft and the viewer's aesthetic experience. The 1913 bicycle wheel was lost, but nearly 4 decades later Duchamp assembled a replacement from newly found prefabricated parts, indicating that the later version was just as valid as his original. Dada artist Kurt Schwitters combined discarded cultural fragments in artwork shown as assemblages. Schwitters created the illusion of depth by placing those papers with darker components behind those that are lighter. The brightest piece of paper in the center of the composition shows an eye-catching cluster of red cherries and the printed German and French words for the fruit. In the winter of 1918 to 19, Schwitters had collected bits of newspaper, candy wrappers, and other debris, and began making the collages and assemblages for which he is best known today. The cherry picture belongs to a group of these works he called Mers, a nonsensical word that he made up by cutting scraps from a newspaper. The second syllable of the German word Kommers or commerce. The picture contains a cork, bits of wood, a wooden pipe, burlap, a card with a drawing of cherries, and newspapers. Gone are the days of highly polished, super realist paintings that had been all the rage for centuries in the fine art world. We now see garbage as the subject matter in fine art. Robert Rauschenberg's combines similarly integrated three-dimensional found objects with two-dimensional painting. Rebus belongs to a body of work Rauschenberg produced between 1954 and 1964, integrating three-dimensional objects with two-dimensional painting. Jasper Johns coined the term combine for such works, which he described as painting playing the game of sculpture. Made from layers of everyday materials found in the neighborhood of his Lower Manhattan studio, comic strips, political posters, fabric, and drawings, this work maintains a flatter, sparser surface than most combines. Rauschenberg hoped viewers would look closely and consider the multiplicity of relationships between words and images, beauty and ugliness, art and non-art. It is rumored that one day Robert Rauschenberg woke up and decided to use his bed as his painting canvas. Bed is one of Rauschenberg's first combines, the artist's term for his technique of attaching cast-off items such as tires or old furniture to a traditional support. In this case, he framed a well-worn pillow, sheet and quilt, scribbled on them with a pencil, and splashed them with paint in a style reminiscent of abstract expressionism. Legend has it that these bedclothes are Rauschenberg's own. The work is thus as personal as a self-portrait, or more so, quality consistent with Rauschenberg's statement, painting relates to both art and life. I try to act in that gap between the two. He wanted to find surprises and show them in his work. So the object itself was changed by its context, and therefore it becomes a new thing. Is this a bed, or is it a painting? When Warhol first exhibited Campbell's soup cans in 1962, each of the 32 canvases rested on a shelf mounted on the wall, like groceries in a store. Roy Lichtenstein was another pop artist who appropriated popular culture as a subject of his art. Lichtenstein found sources for many of his early paintings in comic books. The source for this work is Run for Love, published by DC Comics in '62. In the original illustration, the drowning girl's boyfriend appears in the background, clinging to a capsized boat. Lichtenstein cropped the image dramatically, showing the girl alone, encircled by a threatening wave. He shortened the caption from "I don't care if I have a cramp" to the ambiguous "I don't care." In addition to appropriating the melodramatic content of comics, Lichtenstein manually simulated the Ben-Day dots used in the mechanical reproduction of images. Those are the circles of color that were used in the printing process. At first glance, this sculpture may not appear to represent an ordinary plug-in table fan. Deflated and unable to stand on its own, it must be suspended from wires in the ceiling. Rendered in soft black vinyl, the body and blades sag and droop beneath their own weight. Klaus Oldenburg made many giant objects, both humorous and disorientating in their scale and in their texture. We're now going to have a quick look at celebrity as an idea in pop art. Andy Warhol's double Elvis achieves a strobe effect, emulating a film strip or the passage of time. By layering two images of Elvis one over the other, Warhol creates an illusion of movement. Warhol's shimmery, opaque background achieved with silver spray paint allowed him to easily mask and silkscreen multiple images on top of each other. He created a long line of Elvises that were originally displayed as one long painting and were later cut into multiple paintings. Soon after her tragic death in '62, Warhol made a series of paintings paying tribute to Marilyn Monroe, who was a film star and sex symbol who captured America's imagination in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. He painted the background solid gold before silkscreening her face in the center of the canvas, creating a slick commercial look. The gold background and centered figure are reminiscent of Christian icon paintings from medieval times, perfectly fitting for a tribute of such a prominent cultural icon. Andy Warhol rose to celebrity status during the early to mid-1960s while creating portraits of cultural icons and images of commercial products, and he was also a huge hobnobber who loved to hang out with the cultural elite. Self-Portrait 1966 was constructed in what would become one of Warhol's signature styles, the repeated silkscreen grid of highly saturated color. An expert colorist, Warhol juxtaposed primary and secondary colors as well as different hues of the same color to evoke mystery and mood. Primary reds, turquoise blues, and yellows dominate, while contrasting with secondary greens, oranges, pink, and burgundy. In time, Warhol's self-portraits became as famous as the iconic portraits of Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor. The artist himself had become a celebrity. Think about how Americans and Canadians have come to admire celebrities. We can see in these images how pop art has become a very standard way and a very popular way to portray people of high status in our societies. In the 2008 poster of Barack Obama, you can easily see how, although the colors are subdued and in line with the American flag, Shepard Fairey has definitely imitated the style of Andy Warhol in providing us with a very strong, sturdy, yet still glamorous and thoughtful image of the American president. So as we wrap up the idea of pop art, think about two main things. First of all, the appropriation of imagery that already exists, be it soup cans, fans, hamburgers, or faces of celebrities. And the second main theme is consumerism. Just as we eat up a can of Campbell's soup, so do we eat up the idea of celebrity. As a culture, we idolize those that are highly profiled in the media, such as singers and actors. And so pop art really played with this idea, not only of everyday objects being worthy of glamour, but also taking consumable human beings and making art out of them.